of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. Going to start off with finding something new. This is the jobs plan that the Trump administration unfurled today. The idea being that you lazy, no good for nothings who lost your job, get out there and find something else, you lazy bums. Well, that's kind of the gist of it. And also, the part that gets me is they've come out with this PR campaign. They've got an ad campaign that they've teamed up with Apple and IBM to push the idea that you should go get a job. And it's a nice little website, and you can check it out, findsomethingnew.org. And it says, hey, you could be a broadcast, specialist. It pays, like $70,000 a year. And it gives you a list of schools that you can go to get those degrees. And as I'm looking through the website, and I spent a little bit of time there on the new website, because evidently they've been working on this as their big plan, as their big answer to the massive unemployment for a while. This has been something that Ivanka has taken on because, when life gives you lemons, you obviously make lemonade. Or in her case, when they give you finished lemonade, you turn it into, well, something else yellow. But here's the thing, and this is what gets me. This is what high school guidance counselors used to do when we had high school guidance counselors in every school. It took young people and gave them opportunities to look in different directions. And I've been saying for a while, and this is where I'm not going to completely dump all over their Find Something New plan, because it does promote apprenticeship programs. It does promote things outside of the traditional 4-year college degree that, I've been saying for a long time, something we needed to move away from. We still need people who can take a chunk of steel and turn it into something. We need people who can take a pile of wood and build furniture. We need people who can do things with their hands. We need people with actual skills, other than people looking out of the window and wishing wistfully that they were a Trump. This is not bad, I guess, on a certain level. On another level, though, tone deaf completely. On another level, oh my God, elitist. To be lectured by someone like Ivanka Trump on, well, you should just find something new. It's not that hard. It's not that hard if, daddy's almost a billionaire. It's not that hard if you have the Trump name and all the invisible capital that goes along with that. But the average everyday working class Joe who's lost jobs and their industries have gone away, find it increasingly difficult to go back to school without there being some way to, well, sustain their living. And this is my problem with all of these feel-good kind of, oh, you should just go do something else. Well, in the meantime, while you're learning to do something else, how are you putting food on the table? How are you keeping a roof over your kid's head? How are you, in the transition, living? And none of that is answered by this PR campaign. It's just another one of those things of rubbing people's nose in the situation that they're in. Because look, I know tons of people who would love the opportunity to go back and reskill so that they can get a different kind of job, that they can get a better job or a different job. It's duh. But here's the thing: when you're in your 40s, your 50s, which a lot of people right now, these are the jobs people are losing because of the virus. And again, it's the pandemic that's done this. These folks don't have the independent wealth to go back to these schools and do this stuff. Now, as I said, I'm all in favor of apprenticeship programs. I'm a huge fan of union apprenticeship programs. I've told my kids, you want to go to college, we'll make sure that happens. Or, if you want to be an electrician or a plumber or a pipe fitter, or you go down the list, you want to do those things, You want to get into a union apprenticeship program? We'll try and make that happen too. Because those are good family sustaining, good living wage jobs. And they're the kind that you usually can't send to China. Because last I checked, we still haven't allowed the Chinese to fly in a plumber on a drone and drop them on our front door. I don't want to give Amazon any ideas, but not yet. Now, as I said, look, it's all well and good that they've come out with this plan. It still matters that they do something, that Congress passes something, that Trump signs it. If you want to retrain a generation, do something like the GI Bill did and give people the ability to go get that education. Do something like the trade adjustment assistance does when you lose a job to trade. Give people the ability to collect unemployment, add some health care to that so they can take care of their families and help pay their way through these institutions. So it's not going to just help them, going to help the institutions as well. And we can reskill and retrain an entire population. We can, because understand, out of this pandemic is going to come a ton of job losses. We are going to accelerate the tsunami of job losses that automation is going to bring. We're going to accelerate that right now because one, out of necessity, because we do need to do something about the coronavirus and the pandemic. But moreover, corporate America is now getting tax credits and now seeing that it's beneficial and good for their bottom line. I see them going to that right quick. Now, as I said, I'm not against the find something new plan. Congress is going to have to do something, put some money into it. They're going to have some policy. And in that process, maybe the jobs that you're training for, we talk about how to keep people safe. And this week, a number of labor activists, a number of social justice activists, a number of worker safety advocates came together and demanded certain protections for workers going forward, especially those essential workers. The people we were for a very short period of time calling heroes. You may remember them. They came out and they said, look, we got to have, there's certain things that have to happen. We have to have stronger health and safety protections on the job. We have to have safe workplaces. The employer has to provide a safe work environment and take into account the virus. Make sure that people have the proper protective equipment. Make sure that people are social distancing. Make sure that your workplace doesn't become the super spreader of your community. Also, they need better compensation. If people are going to risk their lives, they shouldn't be doing it for $7.25 an hour. We also need universal sick pay so that when people do get sick, and it will happen, that they can stay home, they can stay away from the rest of us, and not end up losing their homes. Seems like sanity to me. Seems like something we could do. Also, throw in there, you got to have health insurance and health care for folks who do get sick, because we want to make sure that people do stay home and that they do the right thing. Also, we got to do much better in testing. I know the administration is running around saying, well, we do more tests than everybody. Not quite the case. And the fact of the matter is you look at Florida. Florida, last weekend, on Sunday, 15,299 new cases in one day. By Tuesday, they had broken their record for the number of deaths in one day. And you go, exactly what is going on? Well, what we're finding out is as the Jackson Health System spokesperson pointed out, that Miami, Florida is becoming the epicenter of the pandemic right now. Miami, I guess, is going to be the new Florida, and you're going to see cases rise, and you're going to see the number of people who are going to pass rise. This again comes back to the leadership of what we have in DC. The people who brought us, try something new. Here's an idea. How about we find something new for this administration to do? Like the things that we need: more testing, isolation, contact tracing. Maybe we put a little money into training people on how to process the tests. If you want to find a job being a lab tech, it's not a bad job. Maybe we get the test results quicker so people don't have to wait 3, 4, 5, 7 days to get the results. Which, understand, if you have to wait 3, 4, 5, 7 days for the results, how many people do you come in contact with during that time period when you may be infected? So much we need to be doing, and we're not. And the reality is I keep hoping for this moment. I keep hoping for this moment where we, as a country, wake up to a little bit of sanity, and come November, we elect a new president. And look, the reality is Joe Biden just came out with a couple of new plans, things that he's talking about on how we fix our tax code, how we deal with climate change, how we deal with manufacturing policy, how we do some of the things that we need to be doing to move us in the right direction. Look, we've been on the wrong path for too long. Trickle-down economics has caused us unmeasurable amounts of grief and a massive redistribution of wealth in this country. And it's magnified multiple times by what we're going through right now with this pandemic. The fact that people don't have the resources to be able to stay home. The fact that we're a paycheck, 2, 3 away from desperation. We need a different direction. And I keep coming back to this. This administration has been an abject failure at every level for working people. If you're in the billionaire class, if you're the wealthy, you are aces. Never a better guy for you. Wall Street's fat and happy. Your stock portfolio's good. You're happy. The average everyday working stiff, we're stuck in the middle of a pandemic with no leadership, and they come out with a feel-good plan, like find something new, without any actual help to help you find something new. Anyone can put up a website with links for you to go follow on your own with no resources to be able to do that. I can do that myself. You got to have the policy behind it. And this administration, they have been weak on policy from day one. And the reality is, you got to ask yourself, and you ask this yourself every time you go into the voting booth, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Are your options better? I don't know about you, but things are not looking good in my world. I see the numbers rising for people getting sick. I unfortunately see the number of people dying going up. And sadly, things are not going to get better. So I'm glad to hear that Joe Biden has a new plan out. We're going to talk about some of that. I'm going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1978. That was the day municipal workers in Cleveland, Louisville, and Philadelphia walked off the job. That summer was rocked with public sector strikes, starting with a firefighters' strike in Memphis. In Cleveland, municipal services came to a virtual halt as city workers honored a police work stoppage. In Louisville, firefighters walked off the job after the Kentucky Labor Relations Board found the city guilty of unfair labor practices. And in Philadelphia, 20,000 AFSCME members, including sanitation, highway, and health department workers, rejected a last-minute contract offer. They demanded wage increases, but they were also furious when the city announced it would have to lay off city workers to pay an arbitration award to the police. Sanitation strikes soon followed in New Orleans, San Antonio, Detroit, and Tuscaloosa. By the third week of July, transit workers in Washington, D.C. staged a wildcat strike, as did postal workers in California and New Jersey. Labor historian Joseph McCartan notes that public sector strikes peaked in 1975 and again in 1978. By the late 1970s, the volatile recipe of rising public sector union militancy, inflation, and anti-tax reform made public sector unions more vulnerable than at any other time. Suddenly, the union became a convenient scapegoat for public officials dealing with declining relative tax revenues, demands for improved public services, and taxpayer unrest. McCartan adds that by 1978, public employers came out swinging in labor disputes. Public sector unions would struggle to hold their own in an increasingly hostile environment as their ability to strike was being severely eroded. The backlash against public sector militancy set the stage for President Reagan's smashing of the PATCO union just 3 years later.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So July 15th, tax day. Kind of weird to say that, July 15th, tax day, but this year, because of the pandemic, tax day, I'm sure everyone got their taxes in early. We were ready back in April. But, tax day just for me highlights just how unequal our tax code and our economy really is. And like I said earlier, the pandemic has really, highlighted some of the mass inequalities. What it really has shown us is just how well our billionaire class has done, because we've got, I guess, 630 billionaires, and they have seen their collective wealth grow by nearly $600 billion at a time when working class Americans like you and I are losing jobs, losing health care, losing their savings, and soon we're going to see home losses. That's why I got to tell you, I'm happy to see that Joe Biden has come out with a plan to address some of what our rigged tax code has had, and something I've been screaming about for a number of years. The Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force tax policy recommendations are out, and that's why I've asked Mark Rickling to come talk with us. He's a policy and legislative director there with Americans for Tax Fairness, their website, americansfortaxfairness.org. Mark, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me on your show, Rick. I really appreciate it.
So, like I said, our tax code is so terrible for average, everyday working people. I'm thrilled to see Biden come out with something of a plan to try and level that playing field a little bit.
I think you're absolutely right. And just to sort of put it in context, Biden back in March, sort of before the pandemic hit, had about a $4 trillion plan to raise revenues from the rich, from corporations, to do what we all need done in this country, to make new investments in infrastructure, to make new investments in healthcare, in housing, in nutrition, in education, and things that have gone starved for resources for far, far too long. To put that in context, back in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was the Democratic nominee, her tax plan, which also, like Biden, raised revenues from the rich and corporations, was only about $1.4 trillion. It's not exactly an apples to apples comparison, because obviously the elephant in the room between back then in 2016 and where we are now with Trump in the White House is the massive, massive, massive tax cut that he, along with his GOP cronies, passed at the end of 2017, the TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the massive GOP tax scam. And that lost about $1.9 trillion. They said it would pay for itself. Obviously, that's a disgusting joke. Didn't pay for a dime of it, but $1.9 trillion that put the nation's finances in a hole with a massive giveaway to corporations and to rich people.
Yeah, but again, we knew at the time, and I think the American people knew. Polling showed it was a really unpopular tax cut. We've learned the trickle-down economic theory is a fraud. We've learned that if you give rich people more money, we just have a society with rich people with more money. And I'm hoping that with the release of this tax plan, maybe we can start having that conversation about our tax code and just how completely unequal it is, and how we have a system where there's no more estate tax. We have a system where the more you can pocket, well, the more you get to pocket.
Yep, you're absolutely right. So let me try to break down some of the details. It's a little bit complicated, but I think I can do it for you and your listeners. So like you and I and most normal people in this country, most average working Americans get a paycheck. We work for a living, we get wages. And every 2 weeks we get a check and we can see the taxes that are taken out of that. Social Security, Medicare, and then income tax are taken out every 2 weeks. That's not how the very, very rich, those billionaires you referred to earlier, Rick, that's not how they make their money. They make their money from wealth, what's called capital gains. They own factories, they own businesses, they own stocks, they own real estate like our president, and that's how they make their money. And that's taxed totally differently than how you and I are taxed on our ordinary income, on our labor income. So for instance, the top tax bracket for labor income is 37%. For capital gains, for how the rich people make their money off of wealth, the top rate is 20. Why is that? Because of trickle down, because exactly of that theory you were talking about, Rick. That's why they sold the public on, well, we got to lower this rate so they can make businesses profit, and then it'll trickle down to you. Obviously a horrible, horrible lie. So Biden goes directly after that differential. He would raise, for people that make $1 million or more, that capital gains rate up to 37%, where it is for everybody else. And that rate only kicks in about, $400,000. So that's well above where the average American's income is, but not for billionaires. Right. So they would have to pay the same rate as average people that get a salary, maybe not so average at 400,000, but the rate, there's no reason to keep that down at 20%.
No, for me, there's no reason to have, income should be income. I don't care whether you got it from capital gains or from carried interest or whatever. However you got your income, if I got to pay it for swinging a hammer, you got to pay it for moving money from one pocket to the other. To me, in fact, I would say gambling on Wall Street and that kind of investment return should be taxed at a higher rate than the guy who's actually out there in the sun swinging a hammer or driving a truck or keeping us safe or working in a hospital, especially now. It seems patently unfair that gambling is rewarded at a much higher rate than actual work.
I think you're absolutely right. So this was the plan Biden had back in March, sort of on the campaign trail that he enumerated. And so the latest thing, this Unity Task Force that came out, that moves the ball forward from that even more. So one of the issues with capital gains, like say you are Warren Buffett and you want to buy a new yacht. How do you go about buying that new yacht? Do you take some of your shares in Berkshire Hathaway and cash them out?
Nope.
To buy that new yacht? That's the last thing you do. The strategy for billionaires is never sell any assets. Why? Because you don't have to pay taxes unless you sell something. So they keep those assets in the bank account, they keep them in their stock portfolio, and then they borrow against the value of those assets to buy that yacht. So what would I rather do if I'm Warren Buffett? Would I want to sell some shares in Berkshire Hathaway and pay a 20% tax? Or would I want to use those shares of Berkshire Hathaway as collateral, get a loan, pay max 5%, and go about buying whatever I needed to do, a luxury yacht, a new house, whatever. So they get to choose when they pay those taxes, which is obviously a big problem. So that's sort of the new thing coming out of the Unity Task Force, which was obviously, co-staffed by Sanders people and by Biden people on the Economic Committee. He says, this is Biden's Unity Task Force, that we're going to go after this problem of people holding these huge, huge billions of dollars in financial instruments and never, ever paying any taxes on them because they never sell them. So I thought that was one of the most positive things, policy-wise, coming out that was new from this document last week.
No, I'm right there with you. And it's because, the idea of a wealth tax is something Elizabeth Warren had also talked about. Because, I had said the same thing months ago that, rich people, they don't get rid of assets. They hold on to that stuff. They just continue to borrow and borrow and borrow. And then you can't tax that. And it's one of those things where, look, they're smart. They're gaming the system of how we've allowed them to do it. It's just our responsibility as citizens to change the rules when they figure out how to game it, because ultimately they're the people with the biggest shoulders. They're the folks who, should be bringing more water back to the cave, for instance. The people with the bigger shoulders should be doing a little bit more work. And our tax code and the way we fund things is really kind of upside down.
It's totally upside down. So that's the other way you can get at this problem, which you just mentioned there, Rick, is obviously on the campaign trail, Elizabeth Warren had a wealth tax, Bernie Sanders had a wealth tax. It gets at the issue that these rich people with these huge, huge financial holdings, billionaires, are never paying any tax on that. Wealth tax is one way. It's to go after it. The other way is sort of what they're intimating in the Biden plan, which would be, I'm going to use a sort of wonky term here, a mark to market, that every year you would have to report to IRS what the value of your stock holdings are, and you would pay a tax on how much that goes up. If it went down, maybe you would get a credit, maybe you wouldn't pay any tax, but you have to mark your portfolio to market and pay a tax on that.
Yeah.
We don't like mark to market here at American Tax Fairness. We like to say it more as pay as you gain. It's only fair. I work for a living. I get a check every 2 weeks. I pay taxes on that. You are a billionaire. It's only fair that you pay taxes every year like I do.
What do you say to the person, Mark, who goes, well, look, they're rich people, they do all these wonderful things. They're smart, they're industrious. They should be able to keep their money. They worked hard for it after all. What's the response to that? Because I get it all the time. Oh, you're just jealous of Jeff Bezos because he figured out a different widget, and he's destroying the market, literally. What do you say to that?
We just think here at Americans for Tax Fairness about fairness, that people should pay their fair share. You look at what's happening to this country. This country was founded on the principle of equality. The billionaire class is going through the roof. Part of the problem is they are not paying their fair share. They are not paying what they owe. They can, as you said, Rick, totally afford this. And this is something that we need to do in this country to put the country on the right path, so people that work hard can earn hard and make a good living and advance their families, and their kids in the next generation. And that's something that's really stopped because it's been so skewed. So that's all we're asking to do is people paying their fair share. The rich need to pay their fair share.
You listen to The Rick Smith Show with Mark Rickling. He is the Policy and Legislative Director for Americans for Tax Fairness. Their website, americansfortaxfairness.org. We'll make sure we get links out on social media. You talk about fairness, and I guess there's a lot of definition you can get into that. I like to talk about, it depends on the era. I go back to the good tax code of the socialist president, Dwight David Eisenhower. Fair back then was a top marginal tax rate of 92%. Our billionaire class would have been taxed at a much, much higher rate than they are now. We're not talking about going anywhere back to that kind of fairness, are we?
Not at all. So the Biden plan would just undo the damage the Trump tax cuts did. It cut the rate on that ordinary income to 37%. He would raise it back to where it was before that, which is 39.4%, I believe. So just a small uptick in that, nowhere near the 90%, nowhere near, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, she was on 60 Minutes. She floated a number of 70% and people sort of flipped out. But then, as you're saying, you just look back in our history when our nation was prosperous, when people made good wages, and Dwight D. Eisenhower, the noted communist, had a rate of 90%. So obviously this is something the country could do if it wanted to, but that's not what Biden is talking about at all.
No, and like I said, I would like to have seen a much more radical tax plan to go back to the good old days of Dwight. Now, the other part of this is nobody paid the 92% back during the Eisenhower years. There were tons of loopholes, tons of ways for wealthy people to use their money in different ways to lower their tax liabilities, which I'm all in favor of. I'm all in favor of incentivizing how people use money and using the tax code to do that. But the tax rate's got to be high enough to pay for it. We seem to be doing all of these incentives and giving all businesses all these incentives and all these tax credits and all these tax loopholes, but the rates are pathetically low to where companies and the wealthy end up paying nothing, or worse yet, we end up paying them.
That's exactly right. So there's what we're talking about are the top statutory rates, the top marginal rate you pay on your income at the highest end. And what you really want to focus on is what the effective rate is, what the tax rate is you're actually paying. And economists have studied this, and they've looked at what the effective rates, the actual taxes you're paying in this country. And people at the top are paying the same rate as people at the bottom. People living in poverty paying about 20% of their income in taxes. That's what people at the top are paying. That's not how it was in the past, and that needs to be fixed.
No, I'm right there with you. So let me ask you last line of questioning, because, obviously we want to get more revenue into our government. We need massive infrastructure improvements. We need policy improvements. We need health care. There's a lot we need in this country, and you're going to have to pay for it. And the money is, well, where the money is in our billionaire class. How is this going to help the working class, and how does Biden's plan affect average, everyday working folks like you and me?
So one thing, that I think this nation, I don't understand why it got to be so bad, but it's just infrastructure. Our bridges are falling down. Our rail system is not good in the Northeast. There's a ton of stuff we can be doing to repairing roads and just fixing basic infrastructure. I think investment in that will have multiple benefits within the economy. Goods will travel faster. It'll put people to work building these projects, and it will just improve the working of our economy. And it's a no-brainer. So Trump talked about doing an infrastructure deal. He wanted to do a big deal, but he couldn't, figure out a way to pay for it, because the last thing he could do is tax his rich cronies that support the Republican Party. So that's the reason they never came out with an infrastructure plan. But I think, Biden just came out with one today. I think it's about $2 trillion over 4 years to figure out the problems we have with our nation's infrastructure and energy. And I think that's a very good thing. It's a no-brainer. And I think working people in America in general will definitely benefit from this kind of spending, financed by taxing the corporations and financed by taxing the rich.
And it's a good start. I mean, a $2 trillion infrastructure plan only puts us about $2 trillion short of what the American Society of Civil Engineers says we need to get up to even. But like I said, it's a much better start. It's a good start.
Yep, it's a
better
start.
than what we're doing currently, which is, well, nothing.
Exactly.
Mark, I appreciate the time, the thoughts. As always, good stuff. I appreciate you taking time for us.
Thank you so much for having me on your show, Rick. I really appreciate it.
Good stuff. Mark Rickling. He's the Policy and Legislative Director there at Americans for Tax Fairness. Their website, americansfortaxfairness.org. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break, right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that Woody Guthrie was born in Okemos, Oklahoma. Guthrie became one of the most prolific songwriters to ever sing the stories of the working class. His most well-known song is This Land Is Your Land, an anthem whose lyrics claim America for the common man. During the Great Depression, Guthrie traveled from Oklahoma to California with farmers driven off their land by the ravages of the Dust Bowl. He talked with them and learned their stories and songs. He spent the rest of his life singing the songs of those downtrodden. His guitar bore the message, "This machine kills fascists." Guthrie believed in the power of music. His songs serve as a lasting impression for many musicians, from his own son Arlo Guthrie to Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, and many more. Even today, Guthrie's music asks powerful questions about how we as a nation treat workers. In his song Deportees, Guthrie tells the story of migrant Mexican farm workers. His lyrics explain, "We died in your hills, we died in your deserts, we died in your valleys and died in your plains. We died neath your trees, we died in your buses. Both sides of the river, we died just the same." He ends the song by asking, is this the best way we can grow our big orchards? Is this the best way we can grow our good fruit? Like so many of Guthrie's songs, these questions remain unanswered.
You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane. Oh, they will call you the deportee.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Mary Trump, she tweeted out today that it's infrastructure week. And I thought, again? It's like infrastructure week every week. It's like a zombie infrastructure week. It never goes away, but we never do anything about it. I think every week that Trump's been president, it has been infrastructure week. I get emails constantly from different groups going, we're going to rebuild America. It's infrastructure week. And yet, the road outside my house still got giant potholes. The bridges in Pennsylvania are still, crumbling and with many weight restrictions. We got a lot of work to do. And I'll be honest, I'm happy to see Joe Biden coming out with a plan to address at least some of that. $2 trillion is a lot of money, but still not what the American Society of Civil Engineers says we need just to get even. I'm here to share some thoughts on Biden's plan. I've asked Emily De La Briere to come talk with us. She is my China expert. She's also the co-founder of The Horizon. This has just been one of those days. Emily, thanks for taking time for me.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So let's talk about the plan. Biden's come out with this $2 trillion plan. Thoughts?
I mean, this plan is a phenomenal signal. This plan indicates I see everything in terms of China. And this plan indicates that the Biden camp understands that China is a fundamental threat. And it's a threat not just in the conventional national security dimension, but to our economic vitality as a country. And that kind of a threat has to be addressed through comprehensive, concentrated, competitive industrial policy. And this plan is also a signal that kind of a language, that kind of a drive, or at the very least a rhetoric about industrial policy and infrastructure and combating China on those fronts is becoming a bipartisan issue, something that players on both sides of the aisle are being held accountable for, at the very least at the level of language. Now, of course, we actually have to do something,
right? But
that's for tomorrow.
No, this is a great thing because, originally, Joe Biden came out and said, China's not a problem, which the moment he said it, I said, we've now made China the central issue of this upcoming campaign. Because I don't know if you, and I'm sure you've seen it, virtually everything Trump has done recently and the Republicans have been to highlight how China's the enemy and Joe Biden's a China apologist. So you're saying that this plan actually takes some of those concerns into account?
I think that the real concern about what was going to happen on the partisan front, on the political front, was that the left was going to start saying that China wasn't an economic competitor and that we didn't need industrial policy, either because that's kind of what's come before now, or because that would put them in opposition to the Trump administration. And now there seems to be actually a consensus on both sides that this is what we need, and that China is threatening us on this front, and it's time, no matter what the partisan ideology is, for industrial policy.
Right, and we're talking about bringing some manufacturing back, and using our tax code to not encourage outsourcing, but actually punish some of those companies and actually do some of the smart things we should have been doing for, I don't know, 20, 25 years now?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's an argument that we started losing this battle in 2001. So it's been 2 decades now. At least there's time maybe to try to do something. Then the question, of course, is this plan smart enough? Is it sufficiently updated for the modern environment? Like, if hundreds and billions of dollars are going to investment in basic research and development, is that investment going to be protected? Is that innovation going to be protected? Or is this just going to be another case of us pouring money into basic R&D and then having China steal that to compete with us harder?
No, that's an excellent point. But, part of me, and I look at, $2 trillion in new technology for infrastructure, moving towards a more green, more fuel efficient economy, doing some of the smart investments that, I've been talking about for years that we need to do. My fear is that it doesn't, trickle down to the average everyday worker. It isn't something that benefits us as a country. And it's just something that ends up being funneled to Chinese corporations and ends up in the communist government.
Precisely. And I think that's precisely the area. Like, all of these emerging industries, whether that's new energy vehicles or 5G, which are specifically highlighted. But the question in these is, are we pouring money into the basic R&D that doesn't build jobs and goes straight to China, or are we actually trying to create the manufacturing capabilities and the industrial capabilities? Because it's all well and good if we have the best 5G technology in the world. If we're not building those base stations and building our own base stations with our own capabilities, we can't do anything with it. And similarly, who cares whether we have the best patents in new energy vehicles? We can't make batteries. We don't have the minerals to make batteries. We don't have the industrial capability. And so what good does that do us? How can Ford compete with China's NIO if China controls all of this know-how? And how do we come out with the Green New Deal if all of that is on Chinese terms with their capabilities? So those are the questions I think that now have to be being asked. If we want to compete for the industries of the future, where is that industrial capacity?
Right. So I have some friends who say that we need to be more like China. We need more investment, almost like a state-owned enterprise, where our government's funneling money into corporations as much as the Chinese, and that is going to be the battlefield of the future, based on who's subsidizing. It's no longer about bombs; it's about who's subsidizing which corporations and who takes over whose economy.
It's a compelling argument, right? Because when we have a competitor that seems like they're doing better, we want to just imitate the competitor, but we're never going to be like China. And that's just the reality. We're not structured that way. We don't have those norms. We can't get our private sector to work that way. And the idea of trying to turn on a dime and compete by imitating China is just unrealistic. And we also have core competitive advantages that China doesn't. So we have to sit down and say, what are we capable of doing? Where can we actually leverage our strengths that are different? And what comes out of that? Like our innovation, you don't get that by having China's model. But then we have to say, how do we protect our innovation? And we're not going to have a bunch of state-owned enterprises, but at the same time as we try to protect our innovation, we also have to incentivize our companies to build in a fashion that's good for American industry and the American economy.
And you see what Biden has come forth with as something that's going to move us in that direction. You're pretty confident that this is a good first step.
I see this as a very good first step, as a very good signal, and as a signal of consensus. I do not see it as sufficient, and it certainly has to be followed up on. And there are certain systemic holes that exist in it, because Biden's plan is very much about strengthening existing approaches, like strengthening Buy American, which is important. But at the same time, there have to be real institutional differences in how we see this competition. So it's not enough to make sure that X percent of something is American made. We also have to look at supply chains and see where China has intentionally created dependencies and core nodes of our supply chains. And so even if 75% of something is American made, if we have no ability to create or to harvest that 1%, then we depend on China. And that's a framework that has to be changed. And I'm not sure that's in the plan. Similarly, I don't think that there's sufficient recognition of the degree to which China steals our research and development. So when we're pouring that money in, are we paying attention to the fact that their entire industrial strategy is premised off of siphoning everything that we invest in to then compete with us, fueled by our own resources? And then there are the modes by which they do that. Is there investment review in this? And obviously none of these are things that exist at a first stage of a plan like this, but they're things that really will have to be incorporated into anything moving forward.
So as I'm looking at this, my thought is this isn't something we can do by ourselves, which is something that Trump has put us in this world where we're a go-it-alone nation. This is something that Biden's going to have to try and sell, globally, I guess, on a certain level. If I'm hearing you right, that we're going to have strategic partnerships. That if we're going to take on the Chinese government and their state-owned enterprises. It's not just going to be our policies here at home, but it's also policies abroad. Am I getting this right?
That's the fourth point that I forgot. So thank you. You're way better on this than I am. Yes, exactly. There needs, where is the role of the allies and partners here? And where is us reclaiming international organizations and creating bodies that are going to do this to scale and on a global sense? Because that's the other thing, the world has updated. There's the ones I remembered to mention, there are the dependencies, there's the investment review, there's protecting innovation, but there's also that we're in a globalized, integrated world. And all of those other things are about China weaponizing that. So how do we go into this global system and reclaim it so that we can use these connections to our advantage by creating fora of partners that are going to have together a competitive response.
Because the thing that's concerning to me, what Trump has left us, and what Trump is going to leave the next president, whoever that, if that's going to be Joe Biden or, heaven forbid, 4 years after that, what he's leaving us is a situation where we're alone in the world. And the Chinese are branching out. In fact, I guess they've just negotiated a deal with Iran for massive investment into Iran for infrastructure and all the things that we've been talking about. And they're doing this around the world and filling the void that we're leaving by pulling out of these places. And to me, that's just as dangerous as all of the other things we've been talking about.
And this is when I always go back to what perhaps is a foolhardy, but at the very least optimistic take, which is that what we have certainly done is made it clear that we're going to question assumptions and that we're going to put everything on the table. And maybe that is actually what we need to do in order to have a new kind of approach moving forward that has an effect. So now, there's no doubt that we're going to think differently about international organizations and our partnerships and our alliances, and that can maybe create the kind of seriousness that we need to make something new.
Now, I see this issue as central to this campaign, and what the Republicans have done is they have created an environment that's very cut and dry. You're waving the flag. We're Americans, and we're against those Chinese. And the Democrats are in this weird world. So if you're advising the Biden campaign, how do you bridge that simplicity of us versus them, which we're kind of talking about, but doing it in a way that's not based on the kind of simplicity that we get. And I hate to say racist mentality that comes out of this, but based on what we see out of the Trump campaign.
As I see the present moment, we are faced with an existential threat, and one we are not taking seriously enough. But when you respond to an existential threat, you can do so negatively or you can do so positively. Right now, it's not that we're fighting against something, it's that we're fighting for something. We're fighting for the world that we have created as a country, and we're fighting for our country as we know it. And that's a positive vision into which you can bring our allies and our partners and our private sector. And it's a positive vision that doesn't mean blowing everything up. What it means is looking at everything and saying, what are the assumptions and the systems that are the very foundational levels of this? And then how do we save those? And how do we save those together so we can preserve what we actually care about and have made, not let an invader take it over?
No, but last line of questioning I've got for you then, because I lived through the 1980s. I lived through deindustrialization. I saw the city where I grew up, Cleveland, go from an economic powerhouse and a manufacturing powerhouse to a hollow shell of itself, with empty factories, and they could have been bombed out, but they were just abandoned. Do we have the capacity to do the kind of things that you want to do, and that what I hope Joe Biden is laying out? Do we have the capacity to rebuild ourselves based on what we have?
Right now, we don't. What can we actually make right now? And for a country that has long been the global dominant force in manufacturing, the answer is pretty damn embarrassing. But we do have what you need at a very basic level to start investing and to start getting that back. And so the good and the bad news is that we're facing a new industrial revolution. And what that new industrial revolution means is that we can't count on our legacy strengths. And in a world of new energy vehicles, we can't count on our conventional automobile manufacturing. But what the new industrial revolution also means is that in a world where the world is changing, we suddenly have a chance to catch back up to what we've lost. And if we're going to be competing for a new set of technologies and industrial capacities and industrial tools, then we can focus on those and make up for the gap in our past advantages that we've let form.
Well, there's some hope, and like I said, I'm glad to see Joe Biden has put out this plan. I'm hoping you're right. This is a step towards him coming around, and I hope we start going in the right direction. Emily, I appreciate you taking time for us. As always, great having you on the program.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Emily de la Bruyere, her co-founder of the Horizon Advisory. We'll get links on how you can check out the work that they're doing there. Love to hear your thoughts. Do you think China's a problem? Is it the simplistic us versus them? Or as we've been talking about, is it a lot more complicated and really a lot more dangerous? Rick at thericksmithshow.com is where you can email me. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day that would become known as the Great Upheaval, or the Great Uprising, which began in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Railroad workers were angry. They had seen their wages cut twice in 6 months by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The workers went on strike, refusing to let the trains move. 600 trains jammed the rail yard, and soon the strike spread to Baltimore. When the Maryland governor called out the National Guard, workers in the city rose up and attacked them. The guardsmen fired on the crowd, killing 10 people. The strike continued to spread to Pittsburgh, Chicago, and East St. Louis. More than 100,000 workers stopped working. This was not an organized strike by a central labor union, but rather a popular revolt by workers fed up with their wages and working conditions. Everywhere the workers went on strike, they were met with armed troops. Workers, police, and guardsmen were at battle. Workers tore up railroad tracks and burnt railroad buildings. The chairman of the Pennsylvania Railroad voiced his opinion that those on strike should be given, quote, a rifle diet for a few days and see how they like that kind of bread. In Chicago, thousands of workers clashed with police in what came to be known as the Battle of Viaduct. In all, more than 100 workers lost their lives across the country. The events of the summer of 1877 were a turning point in U.S. labor history. Industrialists became convinced that they needed an armed response to labor uprisings. The violence of 1877 forewarned the bloody conflict of labor versus capital that would continue over the decades to follow across the United States. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Mike Pence came out with a real winner statement today. He said, we don't want the CDC. We don't want CDC guidance to be a reason why people don't reopen schools. Let that sink in for a second. Just sit and let it just bubble around inside your brain. We don't want the smart people who have spent their lives and their careers dedicated to fighting disease and tracing viruses and all of this. We don't want their input on how it's going to affect the classroom. We don't want that. We don't want their advice. I mean, basically what he's saying is we don't want the CDC to do anything to stop diseases. I mean, it hurts. It's so crazy that it hurts. And this is at a time where, as I said, on Sunday, you had Florida with the most cases that they've had, the most cases we've had in a single day as a country at 15,299 new cases. By Tuesday, 133 people died on Tuesday, the biggest day that they've had in Florida since the beginning of this pandemic. More people are getting sick, more people are dying. I have, listeners and friends who send me, models from really smart people. In fact, one of my listeners said that don't be surprised if by September we're seeing 20,000 people a day dying, because this thing is just expanding and we have leadership that doesn't get it. Now, the other scary part of this, and again, this is very predictable with this administration. They have now said that hospitals will no longer send any information or data to the Center for Disease Control. They will send it directly to the Department of Health and Human Services. And for me, the simple reality is this is where they're going to fudge the numbers. This is where they hide this stuff. This is where, because Trump needs to be reelected and because his guy is there, we're going to see lots of shenanigans. Because remember, this is a guy who has said, Trump is a guy who said, if we just did less testing, we'd have less virus. We'd have less people sick. It's really kind of crazy. Which I got to tell you, it wasn't surprising when I read the op-ed by 4 former CDC heads who basically said that Trump is doing everything that he can possibly do to undermine the agency, and it's putting all of us at risk. And you go, yeah, that's the point. They're talking about pushing reopening schools. Mike Pence says, we don't need the CDC. We don't need guidance from them. Don't use that. Trust us. Trust yourselves. Trust the people who don't understand how this works. It's really quite maddening. And if you look at the article that Bruce Bartlett put out recently, that this know-nothingism that's out there, this anti-intellectualism that's out there, that I have people telling me that the schools have to be open. It's kind of a line in the sand for the unmasked crowd. This is the moment that they're putting the flag in the ground. Our kids are going to go to school, damn it, because we're Americans. And I just don't understand that level of stupidity. My wife and I both decided our kids aren't going back to school in the fall. Whatever we have to do to get them the education they need for the first several months, they're not going back in the fall. They're not. Look, I'm not knocking the public schools. I'm not knocking the classroom. I'm not knocking the teachers. They can't control an outbreak of head lice. We're in the middle of a global freaking pandemic. We're in the middle of airborne pathogens. You can't keep head lice off of kids. You can't keep them from putting each other's hats on and touching each other's head so the lice jump off. How are you going to stop them from breathing on each other? And good luck keeping the masks on. So we've decided this early, our kids are going to stay home. We're already deciding where we're going to set things up to help keep them safe. And then we will reevaluate month by month. If we don't see a massive explosion that I think all experts and even dummies like me expect in the fall, in November, then we'll look at sending them back in the wintertime. But for right now, based on this administration and the things that they're doing and the know-nothingism that is dominating our political discourse, keeping the kids home. And the thing is it's now come down to this weird kind of world where I've always been an anti-cyber charter guy. I've always been an anti-charter school person because it's a massive profit motive for Education Incorporated. It's how they take our massive amounts of our tax dollars. But in this moment, the online option is all we've really got left. As soon as we get past this pandemic, we open up the schools safely. We move back to some bit of normalcy, but not until we have this under control. And the thing is we were almost there. Had we just held out a couple more weeks, had we just stayed the hell home, wore the masks, had we not had to go to the bar, had we not done those things, we wouldn't be seeing this mass explosion. And we wouldn't have to go through what we're going to have to go through over the next several weeks. And who knows, several months. It's angering. It's frustrating. And sadly, very predictable. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are you sending your kids back to school in the fall? Are you going to take that risk? I'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Six months into the COVID-19 pandemic, the disease is presently raging anew because corporate-serving public officials rush to open the economy, causing more infections and deaths. So gosh, what to do now? Of course, let's take away the health care coverage of some 23 million Americans. Backed by Trump and company, that's the brilliant health care priority being pushed by top Republican officials in 18 states. Led by Greg Abbott, the mangy governor of Texas, these GOP-controlled states have chosen, in this time of national health crisis, to run to the Supreme Court asking its Republican majority to strike down Obamacare. If they get their way, millions of families would lose their health coverage, and insurance giants, which are major campaign donors to Abbott and other GOP officials who are pushing the court action, would again be able to restrict coverage that millions of others now have. It's perverse that any other governor would follow Abbott's lead, for he presides over a healthcare disaster in Texas. It has America's highest number of uninsured people, including a record number of unprotected children. Killing Obamacare would add another million Texans to the 18% who are already uncovered, plus it would then not be there for some 3 million other Texans expected to lose their job-based insurance policies in today's growing pandemic recession. The healthcare nightmare pushed by the Texas governor has been called moral insanity. So naturally, Donald Trump rushed to embrace it. He recently directed his attorney general to back Abbott's effort to pressure the high court to scrap Obamacare. This is Jim Hightower saying, however, this political maneuver is so unpopular, especially today, that there was no trumpeting of the legal filing by the White House. Instead, it was tiptoed over to the court at 10:30 on a Thursday night, hoping you and I wouldn't notice.
What do the corporate powers from Wall Street to Walmart have in common? They hate the Hightower Lowdown. You can see why at www.hightowerlowdown.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Wells Fargo, it's being reported, is the first big bank to lay out the losses that they've had since the financial crisis. They're also expecting J.P. Morgan, Chase, and Citigroup to have lower profits. Not sure what that means. I know they've got high expectations on how they're going to fill their pockets. My problem is what's going to happen in the next several months. As the pandemic, the extra $600 a week goes away, and people don't have jobs, and their income falls. Do we see mass loss of homes? Do we see people evicted from their rentals? Do we see people thrown out of their homes through foreclosures? I don't know, but here to share some thoughts on maybe what we are heading into. I've asked our good friend Pedro DaCosta to come talk with us. He's a senior reporter over at Market News, also writes a column over at Forbes. He's got a new one out on the Fed. We'll talk about that. Pedro, thanks for taking time for us. So, I'm looking at this story about Wells Fargo and about the other banks. What, $28 billion was the number that they were talking about in loans. What do you make of that?
So we're starting to see banks setting aside some cash for potential losses on expected, consumer and corporate loans. And there's a rising fear that as the recession deepens and as it turns out to be longer than the optimists on Wall Street expected, because they wanted to continue selling stock, as this turns out to be a really deep recession, we may just face strings of bankruptcies in various, we don't know where they might happen, but it could happen in housing, it could happen in the corporate sector. So basically policymakers and Wall Street, everybody's looking out for where the losses are going to come and how to best deal with whatever wave is coming.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people talking about the corporate rents as businesses go under, and as people weren't working and they weren't going to be able to pay the rents, and how our system just isn't set up to deal with that kind of scenario, and how the little guy again is going to get screwed. But it looks like the corporate sector could be the problem this time around, and I'm sure Congress will be there with a giant check to help them.
Well, it depends. I mean, and the thing is, you don't want to be a liquidationist and let, corporations fall apart in a domino kind of like scenario, because that would lead to massive job losses as well. So you have to be mindful of it. But the issue is that we've set up a system that relies heavily on the indebtedness of many firms in order to allow, a few like very large investment firms to squeeze out some juice out of these firms. And so, for instance, you have the energy sector is just full of debt because during the boom times, of course, it was really easy for these companies to issue bonds, and it's a sort of chicken coming home to roost kind of issue at the moment. But the point is that when it happens on a systemic level and it happens to the entire economy, policymakers are likely to step in, as you said, and do something. So it depends on what they do and whether or not that spending. And to your point about the little guy, I think it's important to keep in mind that the first time that this shock hit and we had the shutdowns and we had furloughs, there was a fair dose of fiscal spending that led to the creation of a mini social safety net, if you will. We've talked about it on this show before, how we lack a social safety net in this country. But Congress did put up $2 trillion as a bridge, if you will. But now we've kind of gotten to the other side of that bridge, and the pandemic is just about to peak. And now people have depleted their pockets, they've depleted their savings. On the corporate side, or on the business side rather, small businesses that that may have had a cash cushion no longer have it. So the second wave economic hit, in a way, is much more damaging and much more difficult to deal with than the first one.
Right, and this is where I think your article on the Fed is interesting, because they're saying that hold on, this isn't going to be the down and back up bounce that a lot of people were hoping for. This could be long term, because we've really mismanaged the response to the pandemic. I mean, had we just held out a couple more weeks, at least it's my opinion. Had we held out a couple more weeks, maybe we wouldn't have this huge jump in the South.
I mean, I don't know where to, if you want a Monday morning quarterback pandemic management, you could go a little further back than that, right? I mean, I do think that we needed a state to shut down longer. I mean, some of these states never really closed. It's also the case that we never took a very proactive approach to managing and controlling cases in order to make people comfortable going out. In other words, it's not just, there's a lot of economic research that shows it's not really a matter of like government orders for shutdowns. It's a matter of public trust in their ability to go out. So even in places that reopen, if people aren't confident, they're not going to go to restaurants, they're not going to go to bars. They might do so for like a couple weeks, but then as cases surge, people stop doing it. So in order to have a sustained pickup in the economy, you just have to have a proper health strategy, and we just completely lack that. In fact, when we're trying to, instead of doing more testing and more tracing, we're doing less of it, or we're at least talking about doing less of it, then we're in serious trouble.
Yeah, it's crazy. But, you look at, I just talked about how the administration is now saying that the hospitals aren't to report to the CDC with their data. It's supposed to go to Health and Human Services. And I got to tell you, I'm now not going to trust any of the numbers coming out of Health and Human Services. This is another one of those moments where we're destabilizing institutions. We're putting a lot of, at least in my view, too much distrust in our institutions, and I think it's bad, not just for our response to the virus, but as you've pointed out, it's bad for the economy.
When you were talking about that earlier, I was just having a conversation. My other home country of Brazil, as you know, also has a Trump-like president, and also happens to be managing the pandemic very, very badly. And my 69-year-old parents haven't left their apartment for, like 120 days or something like that. And now my dad was just saying that, they're starting to do the same thing in Brazil about, basically the government is falsely reporting that curves are flattening in places where they're not. And so that's leading to distrust on his part and other citizens about the actual data, which is just, it's another level of, it actually gets us further away from the goal of reopening the economy, right? Because if, as you said, you're not even going to send your kids to school, which by the way, I'm not either, because you don't trust whatever CDC refurbished guidance, they're going to set out, then that means it's going to take longer rather than less time for the economy to reopen.
And this is the problem with, look, I don't want to be closed down. I don't want people out of work. I don't want businesses shut down. I don't want the schools closed. But the reality of the moment is we have to deal with this. Things are getting worse. Things are expanding. The only way that we know how to deal with this at this moment, stay the hell away from each other. Stop breathing on each other. It just seems that simple. But yet, what I see coming out of this administration is all they care about is the stock numbers and caring if Wall Street is doing well, because that's their litmus test. If the wealthy are doing well, great. Everyone else, I guess you're on your own.
But the wealthy are pretty, well informed. So, you can only play that confidence game for so long before, right? I mean, the whole Wall Street rallies on hopes of a vaccine, but it tanks on fears of a worsening pandemic. So, if you start to get a financial crisis because of this pandemic, I mean, I guess it's a game of timing in terms of the political cycle. But when you have a raging pandemic in the middle of the summer, and warnings from the CDC today that we're going to have a very dark winter ahead, you would think that we'd be taking more, there'd be a greater sense of urgency at the national level, which has been lacking, from the get-go, unfortunately.
Now, I want to go back to a point you made a minute ago that you actually wrote about in your piece. It's the pandemic stupid, which I thought was fantastic, and that should now be a bumper sticker. Maybe we'll put that out. But the fact that you're saying that it wasn't the government shutdown that kept businesses, without customers. It was people like my wife holding the rest of us in the house hostage, saying, "No, you can't go out because we can't expose ourselves." And look, she's right.
I mean, smart, well-informed people like your wife. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
She's the smart one in the family.
Yeah. She cares about her life and yours and your kids and everybody else.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful for that. But what I'm saying is I agree with with what you had written about the fact that we chose to stay home. It wasn't because of the government shutdown. It wasn't because of that at all. It was, hey, we're staying home because, some of us might be vulnerable.
And don't take my word for it. The study was actually, that blog was based on a study by Austin Goolsbee, who's Obama's former chief economic advisor. So, and his colleague at the University of Chicago Business School. So
see, there you go. You now had to go and ruin it.
Piece of work, so.
You now had to go and ruin it because the conservatives that listen to this show are going to go, see, Obama
study.
Can't believe anything of it.
It's your Chicago study. Your Chicago is considered as conservative in economics as it gets, but I'm sure that could be overlooked as well.
No, because here's the thing, and I get this a lot from people that the claim is that I'm overblowing this, that I'm taking this too seriously. It's not that big a deal. It's just that the Democrats want to use this as a political issue to hurt Donald Trump in November, and they want the economy to be closed. They want the economy to be bad because then we'll vote Trump out, which I find utterly ridiculous. But there are people who, they truly, internally, viscerally believe it.
The fact that this issue has been politicized in this country is just so mind-boggling because I remember I talked to someone in Italy about this, and we think of Italy as a politically fractured nation. I think we might have talked about this before, and everybody there just followed the doctor's orders. There was no fighting. There was no north-south divide. There was no Lombardy versus Sicily. There was nothing like that. And so the fact that people here, look, what you said about being anti-science and anti-fact, I'm a journalist, I'm pro-fact, and I've seen the erosion of trust in facts happen at an alarming rate in recent years. And that might not have mattered when it was facts about, say, the Fed and disagreements over monetary policy, but when it comes to there are actual people dying, why not how can you doubt the accounts of the nurses who are in these hospitals. I just don't understand that part of the doubt. And so, but there's a lot of sort of self-deception as well. And it's not a red state, blue state thing either, because I go out in DC and I see a lot of not very socially distant activity happening. And, you know, and you look at the beaches in New Jersey, again, you don't have to go to the South or to, you know, there's no Mason-Dixie line around the bad behavior. And so I think the lack of national leadership and the lack of urgency from the top sets the tone, because then you can kind of trust different stories and believe different things, as opposed to really trusting the data. I mean, 130,000 people dead. And again, if you listen to just a few of people's experiences who've had COVID, you know, even if you don't die from it, and even if you think you're a young boy, this is a terrible, terrible thing to suffer from. And we don't know what the long-term implications are. So again, I just find it pretty mind-boggling to watch people take these risks. And I watch it with a little bit of a sickening feeling, really, when you watch it. I've had it in the pit of my stomach ever since the beginning, when I'd watch some of these press conferences at the White House, and I knew how not socially distant they were at the beginning, and then they started to change that. And now you watch people at the beaches, it's just kind of like, I don't get it.
It's like, what are you thinking? And the sad reality is they're not. And I don't know if you saw Bruce Bartlett's article the other day, where, you know, he basically talking about the know-nothingism of the Republican Party and how they've pandered to to use Trump's words, I love the poorly educated, how they've pandered to the poorly educated and actually ridiculed and denigrated, you know, anybody who was smart. And these are people who had degrees from Harvard and Yale and all that. It's a masterful con. And even he went into saying, you know, look, Eisenhower did it, Nixon did it, Reagan did it, but they didn't mean it. It wasn't until, you know, Bush and now Trump where they're now the party of know nothing. And I'll tell you, I kind of agree that, you know, the infrastructure that's been in place through, you know, right-wing talk radio and Fox News of pushing all of this conspiracy and all of this insanity, I think that's what's put us in this mess.
Interestingly, on my particular beat, which is the Federal Reserve, as you know, Trump, you know, and to my point earlier about, you know, you really, the stock market might be rallying, but you really can't fool wealthy people in terms of like how much shenanigans you pull on them in particular. So if you look at Trump's appointments, they may have been sort of anti-science and anti-knowledge in most areas, but he picked very, very well qualified, buttoned up George H.W. Bush Republicans, you know, in his Fed appointments. Randall Quarles, Jerome Powell, you know, these are Carlyle Group, you know, Yale, Harvard kind of educated types. And so, you know, because he didn't want to spook the markets, right? He didn't want to pick somebody, you know, like say a more like a Peter Navarro type figure in trade, or a Larry Kudlow. He always stuck to, so isn't that interesting that when it came to his market picks, because he cares about the stock market, he always stuck to knowledgeable people. But to your point, I think the erosion of faith and knowledge in this country is pretty widespread, and it's unfortunately not just Republican. It's unfortunately pretty widespread, and the skepticism of facts and the media is gotten, you know, I'm all for, like, I'm the biggest critic of cable news in the world, but like, to be skeptical of facts that are just proven by, you know, multiple forms of verification is frightening.
Yeah, we're the believe culture. I believe. So you can't tell me any different. When someone starts off with, I believe, you can't tell me any different, it's like, okay, we're done talking because there's nothing really to talk about. You believe it. Last thing I wanted to ask you about, I don't know if you saw the big rollout today of the Find Something New program that Ivanka has been working diligently on. I'm curious, am I being, you know, overly critical of saying that it's tone deaf, elitist, that it's kind of worthless? I mean, basically, it's a website that, you know, like your high school guidance counselor would have. Thoughts?
It was just frighteningly terrible, and I think the best take on it was somebody suggested that she find something new almost immediately. That was their take. And so, yeah, it's just, there was no plan there. As you said, there's no there. It's not unlike her plans for, were we going to have universal child care by now, which, you know, would have certainly helped during a pandemic. She was supposed to be working on that, on like, you know, parental rights and parental leave. I don't know how much progress there's been on that, but yeah, so really not much of a proposal at all, and kind of flippant, really. You know, I think to most people, the notion that you could just find something else, find something new, is preposterous, even in good times.
Yeah, I mean, because here's the thing, and this is where, you know, look, it's a nice little website. It's got a nice bunch of little links. You could have paid a high school kid to do it. That's the level of sophistication I see on this site. I don't know what your thoughts are, but there's no policy behind it. And as I said at the beginning, you know, had we had something like the GI Bill, or you know, the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program has a job loss program that, you know, pays for you to go to community college and you get unemployment during that time. Had there been some of that, I'm like, yeah, that's actually helpful right now. Get people into apprenticeship programs, especially the union apprenticeship programs, which I'm a huge fan of. It didn't do any of that. It just very elitist. Well, go try something else. You know, look at me. I was a model, and now I'm an entrepreneur, and now I'm the presidential advisor. You could be like me.
You make a great point, actually, because, you know, I was talking to somebody about this recently, just having a conversation about the job market, and the notion of reskilling has never been more appropriate, right? Because normally it's usually kind of baloney, and they're trying to like pull the wool over manufacturing workers' eyes and say, if you just, you know, gain these skills, you'll do well. But in this case, you're having entire industry shut down. You might actually need to learn some new things in order to be able to do a new job. And yet, you know, to your point, there was nothing there. And yet I was expecting an Elizabeth Warren-like detailed policy plan from Ivanka Trump, and alas, I cannot believe it was all fluff.
But here's the thing. I'm 53. I would love to change jobs. I'd love to give this up and do something else. I'm sure there are a lot of people, a lot of my conservative listeners would like to be able to have me do that as well. But again, there's nothing in there for me.
Well, having a social safety net is actually part of what allows you to think about career shifts at any given point, right? If your healthcare is tied to your job, if you are unable to make enough to save enough money to not work for a few months while you change jobs, you're never going to actually be able to make that leap. Whereas in places where, you know, the social safety net is there and things fall into gear. And by the way, the unemployment that we're seeing, you know, a lot of different countries had shutdowns like we did, but they're not seeing the unemployment spikes that we had because they have in place policies that allowed employers and employees to keep those connections, so that the furloughs were actually furloughs and that the temporary job losses were actually temporary, as opposed to here, where as soon as they talked about temporary job losses, I had to sort of chuckle cynically because, you know, job losses are not temporary in this country.
No, you're absolutely right.
To the labor force anyway.
So you're not going to change jobs anytime soon. That's what I'm getting out of this?
Hey, I'm sticking to it as long as they keep me.
There you go. Good stuff. Pedro, I appreciate the time. Keep up the great work. I love it. Thanks so much.
All the best, Rick.
Our good friend Pedro DaCosta. Make sure you check out his work over at Market News, also always over at Forbes. We'll get links out in the most recent article. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1978. That was the day municipal workers in Cleveland, Louisville, and Philadelphia walked off the job. That summer was rocked with public sector strikes, starting with a firefighter strike in Memphis. In Cleveland, municipal services came to a virtual halt as city workers honored a police work stoppage. In Louisville, firefighters walked off the job after the Kentucky Labor Relations Board found the city guilty of unfair labor practices. And in Philadelphia, 20,000 AFSCME members, including sanitation, highway, and health department workers, rejected a last-minute contract offer. They demanded wage increases, but they were also furious when the city announced it would have to lay off city workers to pay an arbitration award to the police. Sanitation strikes soon followed in New Orleans, San Antonio, Detroit, and Tuscaloosa. By the third week of July, transit workers in Washington, D.C. staged a wildcat strike, as did postal workers in California and New Jersey. Labor historian Joseph McCartan notes that public sector strikes peaked in 1975 and again in 1978. By the late 1970s, the volatile recipe of rising public sector union militancy, inflation, and anti-tax reform made public sector unions more vulnerable than at any other time. Suddenly, the union became a convenient scapegoat for public officials dealing with declining relative tax revenues, demands for improved public services, and taxpayer unrest. McCartan adds that by 1978, public employers came out swinging in labor disputes. Public sector unions would struggle to hold their own in an increasingly hostile environment as their ability to strike was being severely eroded. The backlash against public sector militancy set the stage for President Reagan's smashing of the PATCO union just 3 years later.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So some interesting news coming out of Alabama. Looks like Elf on the Shelf is going to remain there. Looks like Jeff Sessions will not be the Republican candidate for Senate in the state of Alabama. It looks like he's done. Tommy Tuberville, he is the former Auburn football coach. He walked away with it. He was Trump's handpicked guy. He was Trump's guy. In fact, there was an interesting thing yesterday that caught the attention of the Twitters, where evidently the Alabama coach is named Nick Saban, and Donald Trump kept referring to him as Lou Saban. Lou's been dead probably a decade now. So you're just being picky, Rick. No, I'm not being picky. You should know that the guy's name's Nick, not Lou. Lou's been dead for a while. I'm not an Alabama football fan, and I don't claim to be. Trump claims to love them, and you would think if you loved something, you would probably get that right. So for those who are saying that Joe Biden's mentally incompetent, he repeated Lou Saban several times. So there's something there. But Tuberville is the guy who's going to run against Doug Jones in November. So now look, I'm pulling for Doug Jones. I think he's been a very good senator for Alabama. And I'm hopeful that the folks there in Alabama do bring him back, because I think he's done a fantastic job. But here's the thing, and I go back to my conversation with Pedro, and the reality is a lot of people were expecting that bounce, the V recession. We were going to go down, and then everything we're going to flip the switch and come back up. And I was saying back months ago that we need to have plans in place on how we're going to react to this. And we've missed massive windows of opportunities, because we don't have policy people in place who seem to give a rat's behind. We should have been moving forward on Ivanka's plan for childcare from the beginning, because what's going to happen in the fall when mom and dad have to go to work and there's no school for the kids to go to? And then they're going to have to figure out, my wife and I have had these conversations. How are we going to make sure the kids get the education that they need? How are we going to, police them to make sure that, look, we hope they're going to do their work because they want to and they need to, but they still need the push, the encouragement, that one-on-one attention that a teacher usually gives. This is now coming back to the family, and we're talking about how do we learn this stuff really quickly? How do we move in this direction? What happens if you have both parents who work traditional jobs? What happens if you have people who work off shifts? What are you going to do for the American child with the workers that we have in this country who have been so badly beaten. I know a number of couples who, one works, first shift, one works third shift, and they sleep on the off, and they barely get by as is. Now you're throwing educator on top of this. But if you want to keep your kids safe, I just don't see how you can send them with any clear conscience, how you can send them back into a classroom in this moment. And as some of the the conversation has gone on around this, the predictions are come November, they're going to shut down the schools anyway, and who knows. My hope is come August, we continue to do the social distancing. People wear their masks. We do testing. Maybe we finally get wise up. We keep the kids home from school a couple of months. And we look at it, September, October, November, we start looking at how are things going. And if we don't have a massive spike, if, some of the predictions that I've heard and read don't happen, then maybe we can talk about reopening things and the schools and getting kids back into a classroom. Because my kids, they do not want to be home. They have made it very clear, want no part of doing the homeschooling thing. They hated the computer stuff. Hated it. They want to be with their friends. They want to be in the classroom. They want their favorite teachers. But they also understand that, sanity has to rule and their health is that important. And I'm proud of them for getting that. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day that would become known as the Great Upheaval, or the Great Uprising, which began in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Railroad workers were angry. They had seen their wages cut twice in 6 months by the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The workers went on strike, refusing to let the trains move. 600 trains jammed the rail yard, and soon the strike spread to Baltimore. When the Maryland governor called out the National Guard, workers in the city rose up and attacked them. The guardsmen fired on the crowd, killing 10 people. The strike continued to spread to Pittsburgh, Chicago, and East St. Louis. More than 100,000 workers stopped working. This was not an organized strike by a central labor union, but rather a popular revolt by workers fed up with their wages and working conditions. Everywhere the workers went on strike, they were met with armed troops. Workers, police, and guardsmen were at battle. Workers tore up railroad tracks and burnt railroad buildings. The chairman of the Pennsylvania Railroad voiced his opinion that those on strike should be given, quote, a rifle diet for a few days and see how they like that kind of bread. In Chicago, thousands of workers clashed with police in what came to be known as the Battle of Viaduct. In all, more than 100 workers lost their lives across the country. The events of the summer of 1877 were a turning point in U.S. labor history. Industrialists became convinced that they needed an armed response to labor uprisings. The violence of 1877 forewarned the bloody conflict of labor versus capital that would continue over the decades to follow across the United States. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at laborhistoryin2.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
This is kind of an interesting story, and I think kind of fitting. You may remember back on July 1st, the mayor of Richmond, Virginia, LeVar Stoney, ordered that all of the Confederate statues on city property had to be removed. We now find out where they removed them and put them to. Evidently, they're being stored in a water waste treatment plant on the facilities of this wastewater treatment plant. And I thought, what could be a better place than the place where all of you know what goes to be treated. I just thought it was fitting. Thought it was fitting. But as I said, Elf on the Shelf has been defeated. No more Jeff Sessions to kick around. It's now Tommy Tuberville. So we'll see how that plays out. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top news of the day, I've asked our good friend, formerly known as Red T Raccoon, Ted Cochran, to come talk with us. Ted, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me back, Rick.
So, what do you think? Elf on the Shelf no longer, you're not going to kick him around anymore.
So, I've been disconnected for the past couple hours, and so this is news to me. This is like breaking news as like I'm going on right now. Good riddance to bad rubbish. How to put those two stories together.
Yes.
It's the evil elf is gone. And I hope this is the last we hear of him. Either that or, heaven forbid, in the future he goes and gets a conviction of something that he's done in the past. But yeah, good. Get him out of there.
No, I mean, there was part of me that hoped that he would get the nomination, that he would win this runoff, and that, Doug Jones would beat him, and that we would have a Democratic senator from Alabama again, which I got to tell you, I never thought I would say in my lifetime again. But hey, stranger things can happen.
That's the motto for 2020 is stranger things can happen. You never know. And what I'm seeing around the country is the Republicans are losing power quickly, especially in the South. We're seeing a drastic shift over the past couple months, and hopefully that rings true in Alabama with Doug Jones.
Now, do you think this has to do with obviously the botched response to this virus, and now a lot of southern states are really feeling the heat of it, or the economy? Where do you put the responsibility, or just the insanity coming out of the White House? Where do you put it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of it. It's frustration with, there's a difference between a Trump supporter and a traditional Republican. And there's a lot of people around here who are seeing what's going on with COVID-19, especially here in North Carolina, too. We are having constant problems. And it feels like that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And then it's like, the series of dominoes that are falling, and it's affecting the economy. And then on top of it, it's Trump's just basically throwing crazy onto the fire with what he's saying almost every single day. And it's kind of like, the mystique behind him. And, they were able to go and put up with lies when it wasn't really impacting their day-to-day lives,
right,
or if it was negatively impacting somebody else. But now it's finally really hit home. And not saying that it didn't hit home before, but I think now people are really seeing.
Yeah,
it's impacting my family. It's impacting my job.
Right. To highlight your point, when he was just kicking somebody else, that was great. It was fun watching him kick the snot out of somebody else. But when it was my turn to get kicked, I don't like that.
Yep, exactly. And I mean, all of us knew this was going to happen. It's he's going down the list, and it's Trump for himself, and it's always been that way. And they're finally the blinders have finally come off. And they're realizing it. And I think what's happening, too, is a lot of these Republicans that were attached to the hip with Trump are now realizing that that's seriously jeopardizing their opportunities in order to go and get reelected or to go and win an election. And we actually saw it here in Western North Carolina. I can't remember which district it was, but there was a runoff. And there was a woman that was supported by Trump that got beat by a very young man, very, very far aggressive right wing. But being attached to Trump is not a asset; it's a liability now.
Although he's running around saying he's like 7,000-0. What was it, 68-0 of the people that he's endorsed? It's unprecedented.
Yeah, we know that's not true. I mean, even going back over the past 3 years of these special elections, it's like I used to always say it's like the kiss of death when he goes and says that he is supporting somebody, and we saw that in Alabama. That's like a perfect example of it, multiple times. It's even not even just with a general election, even with a primary. He's endorsing primary candidates that can't even make it past that point. So hey, more power to him. Keep on endorsing people. Let's see what happens. Because eventually November is coming, and he is in, knock on wood, serious trouble. But again, 2020, anything can happen at this point.
Yeah, I'm of the mindset. I don't want to hear that he's in trouble. I don't want to hear that the polls are what they are. You race all the way through the finish line, and you keep on it. Don't let up, because I don't want people to think, oh well, Biden's going to win, I don't have to vote, and then we wake up on the morning after and go, oh no, 4 more years of that lunatic.
Exactly, and that's been you're definitely speaking the truth when it comes to North Carolina too, with Tom Tillis and what we're facing here. No lead is safe. We all know what happened in 2016. Everyone needs to vote. And great, if you think you're ahead, then run up the score. Like, again, I want everyone to go out there and vote. Everybody, we've waited so long in order to go and do this. And it's like, it's finally our time to go and step up to the plate and actually go and do something, to go and help this country. And so regardless of what you hear, what you see, vote. Vote like your life depends on it. And I know this is a catchphrase that everyone's saying right now, because your life really does depend on it.
Yeah, because it does, absolutely. But here's the thing, and I go back to this. This. I think it was his campaign manager who threw it out, that he was like 68-0, and it was one of those things. When I read it, it reminded me of Kim Jong-il. If you remember, the stories supposedly about him, that dear leader, the first time he went bowling, he had a 300 game. The only time he ever went golfing, he had 18 holes in one. I mean, just these ridiculous kind of urban myths and urban legends. I just read that. I'm going, have we really fallen into that kind of a place?
Yeah. And, some people are buying it hook, line, and sinker. And that's what scares me, especially being a veteran, kind of seeing a populace that was under that control, as far as like Saddam Hussein is concerned. It's happening here in the United States. And, it's something that we need to go and put a stop to immediately. It's just insane. The way that he positions himself, and the way that he's going and doing this, and in the back of his mind, I have to think that he thinks that this is going to go and win him an election. It's like that, I'm invincible, I'm bulletproof when it comes to it. I can go and shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and nothing's going to happen to me. And the sad part about it is that we've been seeing this over and over and over again when it comes to people kind of stepping up and actually going and doing actions against him in regards to like legislation, or where it goes into investigation.
Yeah,
we saw the whole entire thing with the Russian bounties.
Right. I mean, it's every day. There's a new massive scandal every day, because we're not talking about the bounties anymore. We're not talking about the Russians, paying bounties on American soldiers. And look, I don't know if they actually paid them. I don't know if because our news media has been all around this issue. They've done such a masterful job of muddying the story that now it's just gone away.
Yeah, you light so many fires in a field, you can't tell where the first fire was actually set.
Yeah.
And I've stopped saying it to my wife, because I would go and pull up the news and I'd be like, okay, this is the one that's going to get him. And I had that sentence half out of my mouth, and she stopped me. She's like, don't even say it. Because she's like, it's not true. And that no matter what, the only thing that's going to go and change is the full election.
Right.
And actually voting him out of office at this point. And that's, I'm conceded to that fact too. We only have a few more months. We have to do something about it, and that's voting.
No, I said from the beginning, you're not going to impeach him, because the Republicans aren't going to find a spine. He's never going to resign. There was that move for a while that everyone's saying, oh, he's going to resign. He's going to resign. I'm going, he's never going to resign. His level of narcissism is never going to do that. Even though Mary Trump, his niece, said that he needs to today, it's not going to happen. He needs to be thrashed at the polls, and as a country, we need that. We need that thrashing of him, that repudiation of everything that he stands for, so that we can begin the healing process and begin to put back together what was once a proud, good country.
Yeah, and punish everybody up and down the ballot also.
Yes.
All these people that, have gone along with it and have supported it the whole entire time, the Senate, the House, even like your local officials, because that's what we're seeing right now. I'm telling some people are, like my district's blue or my state's blue, I don't really need to go and vote. we're seeing right now the impact of local officials when it comes to COVID-19. They're making decisions on a local level that are impacting your family, that are impacting your job. You need to go and do something about this. And you have to make sure that every single vote matters and every single box on that ballot matters also.
Yeah, and to be honest, for me, the story today that came out, I'm sure you saw it, that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was hospitalized with a possible infection. Immediately, my mind goes to hang on another 112 days because I don't want McConnell and Trump ramming through another Supreme Court justice.
No, and it's sad that we have to go and basically kind of put all of our faith into her and her health. It's like, like 300 with the gladiators. It's like Ruth Bader Ginsburg by herself, kind of like holding the line and trying to go and just stay around just for a few more months in order to make sure that we don't lose another seat when it comes to the Supreme Court. Because again, at the end of the day, like this whole deal that they made with the devil, as far as Trump is concerned, goes back to judges. And I think that's really at the core that the Republicans really kind of looked at him as their savior when it comes to winning back the court. And we have to have a line in the sand, and we have to go and stop that. And fortunately, knock on wood, she's been around and she's been holding tight in regards to this, but that's just not going to last forever.
Yeah.
Please, sooner or later, we just need to let the woman rest. Like, let her retire at some point, and live out the rest of her life.
Yeah, just don't go to Florida.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
I mean, Florida's a mess.
It really is. And this is where we see what happens when you go and you bury your head in the sand. And you go and treat something that is very real and is impacting a lot of people's lives and treat it like a hoax. And that's another area, again, and this is kind of what I've done previously in the past couple months, is we're working in the swing states. Florida is vitally important, and we need to go and change things immediately, especially down there. There's no way that I would step foot in Florida right now. And I'm in North Carolina.
But this is that moment that Joe Biden has to step forward, and I think he has with this new plan that he's come out with. There's some good stuff in this. I'm always a little critical. Things could be a little bit bolder, a little bit bigger, but I thought this $2 trillion infrastructure plan, pretty big.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing with Joe, is that he needs to go and find his footing. He needs to go and find that voice that we all know of Joe, and I'm starting to see that more and more. And I think what's happening too is that he's working within the party, and he's kind of bringing both sides together in order to go and find solutions for a lot of these major problems. The whole entire, I know it's not called the Green New Deal, but like, again, he was talking about a lot of environmental issues today also. These are really important things in order to go and get the base more mobilized and more interested in the whole entire election.
Well, I mean, he a lot of, from what I understand, was in his plan came from Governor Inslee from Washington, and who I thought had an incredible. In fact, to be honest, and I wanted Governor Inslee, higher than I wanted Joe Biden, but because of his green plan.
Yeah, and I think that's the important. The primary was very divisive. But what I always look at from my perspective as far as the primary is concerned is trying to find the best ideas that you have from individuals and then go and put it together as an overall platform for the nominee. And you're right, he had a great plan. He was actually one of the ones that I was really interested in is finding out more about, and wish he had a larger platform to go and share some of those ideas.
Yeah, he was my third choice. I mean, on my list, he would have been number 3. Because of that, and because he almost number 2, but he was number 3 simply because he talked about how labor was going to be affected and how we were going to put workers at the front of this, because what's the point in changing over your economy if it's going to harm your workers? What's the sense of saving the planet if you've created a desperation class of workers?
Yeah, and there's a lot of and that's a really kind of good thing to look at, is that there's opportunities within a lot of these plans in order to go and utilize the workforce that we have. And you were talking about it previously with your last guest, is going to re-educate people in order to go and have a more sustainable job. And a more sustainable way of kind of dealing with the issues that we're dealing with as far as the planet goes. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. We can go and work together as far as some of the challenges that we have.
Yeah. So let me ask you a last line of questioning, because you brought up the retraining, and I got to get your opinion on this. Thoughts on Ivanka's big find something new plan?
You might have to extend this show for another hour. So I'm deeply passionate about what's going on, because right now I'm unemployed. The organization that I worked with has closed up shop, and so right now I'm job hunting. I've put out probably about 50 to 60 applications within the past 2 weeks, only gotten 2 interviews. And it's not from a lack of trying. There's so many people unemployed right now.
Right.
And there's so many people trying to fight for one job. And, all of us deserve to have the opportunity to go and work. And none of us want to be late. None of us want to sit at home and do nothing. Believe me, it bothers me not working. And so what I've taken advantage of as a veteran, they formally called it the Vocational Rehabilitation Program. So what it is, it's a job retraining program. Right. They're paying for me to go back to school in order to go and get a degree, in order to go and help myself as far as being more hireable. And I've worked in the past in regards to dislocated worker training programs. This is through the WIA program that Obama did during the recession in 2008. There's opportunities in order to go and get people retrained, get people educated, either through a traditional college system, through a technical college, through mentoring, and kind of build up the education system too. It's one of those things, again, there's a lot of challenges that if we work together, we can go and address both of them, education and both job markets.
Yeah, but ultimately, totally her fluff plan had none of that help associated. There's no policy behind this. And look, OEO, I thought was a good idea. It was a good thought to have the states figure out how to use the unemployment system to be a job training center, to pair with unions and apprenticeship programs and community colleges, and bring the kind of a one-stop shop thing for the average everyday worker. The sad reality is I don't think there's enough resource in it, and you can't live off of what you get from it to actually make it possible for anyone to, in my view, to get that kind of job retraining.
And the sad part about it is that these are existing Department of Labor programs. And so actually you used one of the terms that they have in regards to that existing program. They have these one-stop, I'm trying to figure out what the last word is. It's a one-stop location in regards to a center where you would work with a counselor to go and, figure out which, areas you're best suited for. All of these are existing programs. All they need is funding. Someone just needs to open up the book in regards to the Department of Labor. All these things exist, and they actually existed all the way back from Bush. The fact that they haven't even taken the time to go and see how these programs exist and how they can go and just add additional funds to them scares the living daylights out of me.
What's interesting to me is, they came out with their little fluff website of information that has been there since Obama. So, I got to be honest, and you just reminded me of this. I'm surprised they didn't destroy it because it was Obama's idea.
They did. And so that's the interesting thing about it, is that they've been stripping that program continuously for the past 3 years. Just because I've worked exclusively with it in my former job, I was working for an IT training company. And what we were doing was we were doing dislocated worker programs. When companies would go and shut down, they would send their people to go and get IT training. Every year, they've been cutting the budget in regards to that. And so, it might even be non-existent at this point. Finally, the time has come where you actually need it. You have a downturn in the economy, and then that base right there is no longer available. No. Again, this is years of neglect. It's just when we go back to infrastructure, it's you don't do repairs on a bridge, or you don't invest money on a bridge, sooner or later that bridge is going to fall. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now as far as the job market and worker training program.
Yeah, sadly, but it got what it was supposed to get. It changed the narrative a little bit, and it got Ivanka, it got her name in the newspaper.
Yeah, any press is good press, and that's exactly what's going on. It's, again, starting just fire after fire after fire in a field, and you don't know what originally went and started the fire in the first place. And we're going to go and see it. It's going to get worse and worse over the next couple months. It's that 24-hour news cycle. They know how to manipulate it very, very well. And it's a cat chasing its tail. It's what we're seeing is that the media just goes and falls for it. Everybody on social media goes into outrage frenzy and starts, having things trend, or they start going. They don't think back more than 24 hours, and heaven forbid 48 hours. Again, we have a Navy ship burning in San Diego right now, and you won't hear a word about that right now, just because that's not the flavor of the day.
I read they've almost got it under control, which is a good thing. But
it really is.
But you're right. That didn't lead the news today.
No, and that's a major. Again, I'm just using this as an example. That's a major ship. That's going to be one of the biggest losses that the Navy's had in decades. And again, we're so quick to move on to the next thing that we just completely forget about it. And that's what we're seeing as far as this pandemic is concerned too, is that we got kind of sucked into a lull. I'm sick and tired of hearing about this. I know I've heard that from so many people. It never went away. And what happened is we kind of fell asleep on it, just like everything else that we've seen in the past 3 years. And it's really tough. It's like human nature that we want to go and kind of see what's new, what's next. But it helped Trump out tremendously, and that's what's keeping him around, for this whole entire period of time.
Yeah, sad stuff. But Ted,
Yeah.
I appreciate the time. I appreciate the thoughts. It's always great talking with you. Please come back sooner. It's been too long.
Definitely. I love talking to you. And yeah, anytime I'll come right back on for you.
Beautiful. Great stuff, Ted. I appreciate it. Our good friend Ted Corcoran. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Red T Raccoon. You may remember him as Red before. He's now out. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that Woody Guthrie was born in Okima, Oklahoma. Guthrie became one of the most prolific songwriters to ever sing the stories of the working class. His most well-known song is This Land Is Your Land, an anthem whose lyrics claim America for the common man. During the Great Depression, Guthrie traveled from Oklahoma to California with farmers driven off their land by the ravages of the Dust Bowl. He talked with them and learned their stories and songs. He spent the rest of his life singing the songs of those downtrodden. His guitar bore the message, "This machine kills fascists." Guthrie believed in the power of music. His songs serve as a lasting impression for many musicians, from his own son Arlo Guthrie to Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, and many more. Even today, Guthrie's music asks powerful questions about how we as a nation treat workers. In his song Deportees, Guthrie tells the story of migrant Mexican farm workers. His lyrics explain, "We died in your hills, we died in your deserts, we died in your valleys and died in your plains. We died neath your trees, we died in your buses. Both sides of the river, we died just the same." He ends the song by asking, is this the best way we can grow our big orchards? Is this the best way we can grow our good fruit? Like so many of Guthrie's songs, these questions remain unanswered.
You won't have a name when you ride the big airplane. Oh, they will call you the deportee.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So that was a quick 2 hours. I got to tell you, doing this program as long as we've been doing it, every day just flies by. It's quite amazing. And I'm so happy everyone showed up, shared some of your thoughts. I got a bunch of emails I didn't get to. We will get to some of that hopefully tomorrow. But if you've got any questions, comments, thoughts, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you missed any of today's program, you can download the podcast there at the website or get the app on your smartphone and take the program on the go wherever you go. At the end of this, look, we're going to get through it. Hopefully get to the other side. Just, we're going to have to get out and we're going to have to vote, hopefully by mail. But ultimately, as Ted pointed out, he's got to go. We got to get him and everyone else out and reclaim and rebuild our country. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.